Honorable Member Sherrod Duncan passed some papers to the speaker before me. I was hoping he was giving her the speech that she was supposed to present that relates to Budget 2021. But before I go there, let me first commend and congratulate the Minister with responsibility for finance, the senior minister in the Office of the President, Dr. Ashni Kumar Singh, for crafting a budget that I fully support. Mr. Speaker, I thank the minister and his staff for navigating the fiscal space and doing so by presenting a transformative, catalytic, pro-development, and people-centered financial blueprint. Mr. Speaker, this is against the backdrop of the global onslaught of a COVID pandemic, a pandemic that has paralyzed the economies of many countries. But here we are against that, not at all introducing new taxes. Here we are against that, not at all having measures that could be considered punitive and draconian. Here we are with a 2021 budget that touches people in every sector and ensures that we will have the dynamic transformation of the landscape of this country and engender in the population the resilience to recover from a ruinous abyss that the last government put this country into. Mr. Speaker, I support my colleague minister's outstretched offer to members on that side for scholarships and comprehension. It is important if you're going to understand and relate to financial management in a prudent, strategic manner, as this budget is for this country. We have been regaled from the moment the debate started with fallacious, disingenuous, histrionic gymnastics coming from that side of the House to justify a surreal world that they have created and perhaps believe existed under the tenure of the APNU AFC government. But let me bring some reality to this. Let me bring some realism. Let me penetrate that surreal bubble that they have wrapped themselves in. Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, what is the AFC APNU government's legacy? Taxes increased by 83 billion from 2015 to 2019. By 2019, tax revenue on the backs of the people of Guyana was a whopping $225.9 billion. Mr. Speaker, in 2014, it was $142.9 billion. We saw the contraction of non-oil sectors. We saw the collapse of industries, rendering a number of people without salaries, sustenance, and putting them on the virtual breadline. That is the reality. That is what Guyanese people lived with and lived under in the 5 years of APNU AFC government. Mr. Speaker, to stand here and to lecture about credibility, integrity, first, you have to be able, Mr. Speaker, the honorable members on that side of the House have to be able to uphold the Constitution of this country. And Mr. Speaker, they have to be able to face the people and say that the honorable members of that side of the House were not part of the unmitigated assault on the democratic fabric of this country and the trampling of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, we We can speak, but our actions speak much louder than what we want to say to distract from what the People's Progressive Party Civic is offering this country. There are many expectations, exacting expectations from the people of this country. And Mr. Speaker, from our manifesto to our budgets that we've presented in 2020 and this one, we are fulfilling the needs of the people because we are unapologetic about consulting with the people from the grassroots level and all stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, we're not going to apologize for that. And if people want to come here, Mr. Speaker, and say that they're not consulted, then they're not interested in the progress of this country. Mr. Speaker, sometimes it is important to say it as it is. And I'm here to say it exactly as it is. Mr. Speaker, 7.3% contraction of the sugar industry. 3.7%. Fishing industry or sector contracted by 17%, and the bauxite subsector by 41%. Because this government was waiting for oil to flow. That's not how you manage prudently. That's not how you manage strategically, Mr. Speaker. We have seen small businesses in this country crumbling, shutting down, because there was nothing for them to invest. There was not the kind of capital that they wanted to expand their business, to grow their business. Mr. Speaker, we have in 5 months seen the Guyanese population scarred, and probably scarred forever because of the events that transpired. We cannot hide from those facts, Mr. Speaker. Let's contrast. Let's look at the stark contrast of the PPPC's budget with the legacy that I mentioned briefly. Let me not venture into the Sustainable Livelihood Development Program. I will leave that for another colleague to tell you a lot more about that. That was akin to a slush fund and one of the most corrupt schemes by the APNU AFC government. Mr. Speaker, to try to distract the people's attention to what the PPPC's budget is offering, reversal of taxes. Why we reversed it? Because you put them there. Removal of tariffs, and on basic necessities, food, household items, and what has become so necessary in a COVID-19 pandemic that we need for school, work, and to mitigate the effects of distancing data. Mr. Speaker, when we look at all of these measures, we should not look at them in isolation, but at the cumulative effects.
Honorable Member Mr. Duncan, didn't you have the chance to speak?
Thank you,
Continue, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these are cumulative benefits for people across the length and breadth of this country. Mr. Speaker, what I could manage to discern from what transpired before I got up was a reference to one Guyana. Mr. Speaker, one Guyana, what do we say? One people, one nation, one destiny. That has been there, enshrined in our motto, not crafted by the former president, Mr. Granger. Mr. Speaker, in fact, if you want to go all the way back into history, if we are into history lessons, then we only have to look no further than the father of Mr. Robeson Ben, Minister of Home Affairs. Mr. Speaker, when we come in this August Assembly, we must come armed with facts. We must come armed with the kind of substance that a debate warrants. We, on this side of the House, we are looking for intellectual stimulation. We are looking for constructive, objective recommendations that will better or improve what we are offering. Mr. Speaker, we are looking for the positive contribution from members on that side of the House that will add to the well-being and welfare of people. Mr. Speaker, to want to be part of consultation, you must be receptive to the views of others. Mr. Speaker, I believe with all my heart that the members of the opposition do have a role to play in this land. But first, it is imperative they need to get off their high horses, be on the ground with the people of this country, and work and serve the people on the country who they purport to represent. Mr. Speaker, to sit or to be here as an elected member of Parliament has with it the privilege of service, the privilege of crafting legislation, the privilege of debating in a very constructive manner budgets such as these. But more importantly, to bring facts and truths to the floor and not to look at this arena for partisanship, cheap salvos, racial invectives that seem to abound from that side of the House, and every other complaint and conjecture to distort and to distract from their dismal performance as government. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I have heard mentioned several times about this government. Mr. Speaker, I've heard mentioned several times about this government taking plans and programs from the former government. I will tell you, even the computer on my desk was never turned on. It sat there unused. Mr. Speaker, I visited buildings. The buildings are in a sad state of decay. Monies were budgeted for. Monies were returned in large measure because programs were not happening. Vulnerable populations did not benefit under the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security in the manner in which they should. So how can the members in this House, on that side of the House, come here and say that we are trying to plagiarize or take programs when nothing existed in large measure? Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security has increased its budget by $3.8 billion, with $26.2 billion invested in our current expenditure and $3.3 billion in capital expenditure. And Mr. Speaker, there's much to be done. I believe, Mr. Speaker, once the cacophony of shrill emissions from that side of the House ceases, I think the people of this country would like to know what this ministry has in store for them. Our laser focus is on women, the elderly, children, young people, persons living with disability. And we have also done some cross-collaboration among ourselves as ministers of government to ensure that our programs are efficient, effective, and they get across the length and breadth of this country. Because when we speak of inclusivity, equal opportunity, we walk our talk. Mr. Speaker, $80 million have been directed towards training of women. We have not seen in any budget presentation prior to this one in recent time that specific allocation. None. Training of women will give them the impetus that they need to move to a state of independence from a state of dependence, to move from skills training into the world of work, vocational training. We are shattering the gender stereotypes and encouraging women to move into the arena of different modes of study and work. The ministry will be offering training in interior and fashion design, graphic design, video editing, ICT, child and elder care, business and micro enterprise development, jewelry making, biodegradable wear manufacture. And those are only some of the programs that we have earmarked for women in the hinterland and on the coastland. Mr. Speaker, because I understand what has happened when women are deprived of accessing programs because maybe they would have dropped out of school, they will also be focused on functional literacy. Again, brand new for women. Mr. Speaker, emphasis will be placed on leadership training, advocacy, legislation, and social issues. You're probably wondering where will be the hub of all this training? It will be taking place at a building that has been neglected, that has fallen into disrepair, that when I walked into there, the computer lab was almost bereft of working computers. The kitchen was in a total state of chaos, but that's going to change because the Guyana Women's Leadership Institute will benefit from a spanking, state-of-the-art, modern kitchen to the value of $20 million, a computer lab, and refurbishment. Mr. Speaker, we will see the transformation of the lives of women once they have not only gotten the training, but been a part of an extensive program that moves them from training to investment and grant access so that they can start their businesses, be their own bosses, and if they so wish, have the marketing, the skills that make them more marketable and employable. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this has not come out of thin air. In the short span of governance that we have had, the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security embarked on the Garment and Cottage Industry Initiative that benefited almost 100 women. We saw emerging out of that initiative 58 business proposals, 14 success stories, and they were linked with the Small Business Bureau, IPED, and other agencies to ensure that they can do the best that they can with what they were given. Mr. Speaker, we also launched a brand new initiative, the Mobile Street Food Kiosk. This will open several industries to various Guyanese with skills, from welding to joinery, carpentry, being a part of the supply chain, food preparation, and also design. This is intended to capture Guyana's cuisine, to also highlight the beauty, the diversity, and the uniqueness of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I am very, very happy to also tell you that that is not the end of the story. The Guyana Women's Leadership Institute will have the first business incubator directly targeting women. They can go to the Guyana Women's Leadership Institute and benefit from training in micro-enterprise, improvement of their product or skill, and also linkage to marketing opportunities. Mr. Speaker, following this, as we move to International Women's Day, we will be launching We Challenge, the Fast Pitch. We, the acronym stands for Women's Entrepreneurs Challenge, the Fast Pitch. Once that gets under the way, women can pitch their business proposals and vie for 10 grants that will get them started on their business. That's not copy. That's creativity, innovation, and original. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, we're moving to create a digital database and social media platform to ensure that women's products and skills are marketed. You know, I sit very quietly and I listen to the members on the other side of the House. And I listen hoping to hear that there is mention of persons out there who would want to hear that they are considered, they are represented by that side of the House. But Mr. Speaker, I can say this budget represents them. People living with disabilities. Not before have we had the sum earmarked in this budget earmarked at any other time. And I would like to thank the Minister of Finance for paying attention to this population, and that is the population of persons living with disability. A $30 million modern building will be constructed in the compound of the Mahaika Hospital and serve as a hub for training of persons living with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, that's original. Mr. Speaker, we will be working with these groups of persons to ensure that they're trained to join the labor market, to be competitive, and to also start their own enterprises. The National Commission on Disability has been allocated $50 million, and $120 million would have been allocated for vocational training, provision of support, prosthetics, and equipment for persons living with disability. Mr. Speaker, violence is entrenched, and it is something we should not be impervious to. We live in a country where women continue to lose their lives. The recent one really disturbed me at a deep level, and that was the elderly grandmother or the elderly woman who was raped, battered, and brutalized. It should concern every one of us in this honorable House, Mr. Speaker. My heart goes out to all the families who would have lost wives, mothers, and sisters and grandmothers. And I extend my deepest condolences to them for their loss. Mr. Speaker, because we're committed to tackling violence in all of its forms, we are building on something that we launched within the first 3 months of sitting in office, the 914 hotline. Mr. Speaker, that side of the House can be blow, talk, yap, whatever you want. But the reality is, within the first 6 months of this government's tenure in office, we have done. 914, brand new. 914 is an initiative that is intended to benefit people, women, children, men, anyone. I don't know who wants to, anyway. But, Mr. Speaker, it's intended to benefit persons who are experiencing violence. I want to build a culture of reporting. We see it, we hear it, we report it. Call 914. Mr. Speaker, it is important that we continue to complement 914, and we're doing so with the Survivors Advocates Program, with ensuring that the 914 center is populated with operators who have been trained in counseling and dealing with crisis management. Mr. Speaker, a lot of our attention will be focused on violence. And in addition to launching 914, we signed on to the Spotlight Initiative. You can see, Mr. Speaker, nothing has been excluded. We can sit for the remainder of this debate and find or conjure all the faults of this budget, but I think the people would expect from you, honorable members on that side, a contribution that can enable us to continue on this journey of development and progress. Mr. Speaker, old age pension, public assistance. We have done much. The old age pensioners number over 61,000. And we have spent a lot of time thinking of how we can improve the quality of service. And we're pleased to say, shortly, in the month of March, there will be 40 new locations where pensioners can collect their pensions. And that would be at MoneyGram and Western Union locations across the country. We're also advocating those who have bank accounts to utilize the banking system so that there's no need to go and join long lines to collect pension. Mr. Speaker, if that was not enough, we have delivered on a promise that we made, and that is to increase pension. Pension as from January 1 would have moved from $20,500 to $25,000. And that, Mr. Speaker, puts $3 billion back into the pockets of our pensioners, increasing their disposable income and ensuring that that goes back into the economy. That's how you stimulate an economy, Mr. Speaker, not leaving the country state of finances in overdraft. Mr. Speaker, we do not believe in wild, wanton, reckless expenditure. All of what we are doing is geared towards ensuring that people have a better quality of life. Public assistance has a 33.3% increase. Believe it or not, it is the highest increase to public assistance. I am aware that there is more that is needed, but this is just the beginning. Mr. Speaker, it took the APNU AFC government all 5 years to increase public assistance by $3,500. We have done that in 1 year. And we have moved public assistance up higher. Under 1 year. Good point. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security serves people across this country, people in difficult circumstances. And we have been doing that at a rate of 75,263 persons who would have accessed social assistance. The member on that side of this House spoke about the local Board of Guardians. Mr. Speaker, if there was chaos, it was there. We reviewed, we revamped, we increased the numbers of boards, the local Board of Guardians board, so that they can adequately cover and serve the people across the country. Mr. Speaker, I always wonder why it is when we are doing things in a constructive, structured way, they always complain or they always comment. If it's not political, it's racist. Good God, come with something that's a little more original. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about our institutions under the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security. I will never forget when I walked into the ministry on day 2, one of the persons working there said, you know, my former minister never even said, good morning, how are you? And then when I went to visit some of the institutions, they'd never seen the minister before. I know the Attorney General misses a few members, very close to his heart from this sitting in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, but when I visited those institutions, what horrified me was that all the talk in the previous budget of fixing and repairing these institutions, it was not so in reality. The night shelter is undergoing a transformation, complete overhaul, complete rehabilitation, not only physical rehabilitation in terms of tiling, painting, putting in windows. I could not believe that people were kept in a room without windows and parts of the wall. That is inhumane and callous and unacceptable. That's what's happening right now, Mr. Speaker. We will also see the night shelter benefiting from a brand new kitchen. Mr. Speaker, very early, there were fires at the Palms. And you know what the horror of it was? Patients had to be lifted down. Persons housed there had to be lifted down because the lifts were not working. Shameful. Stretchers were not there. Shameful. And we hear that you've cared for the elderly of this country. Terrible. Mr.
Honorable
Speaker.
Minister, we care for you to continue, so could we get an extension move, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to seek 5 minutes extension for my colleague to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Shishira. Honorable Minister Dr. Persaud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've heard reference to pink slips. And when you hear slip, you think of other slips. But the pink slip, and I took pains at one of the sittings to explain how the process worked. I took pains to explain why the Ministry of Local Government and the Ministry of Finance were taking the lead on this because of the number of staff that they have and also the structure, the regional structure that exists under the Ministry of Local Government. Mr. Speaker, I also took pains to say that phase one was still happening. Phase one. And when phase one concludes, the pink slip phase will be in operation. Mr. Speaker, if the members are honest with themselves, you know what should concern and bother them? That they did nothing. Nothing. Whether you want to say we are giving $25,000, honorable members, or you want to say that people will get a pink slip to later get $25,000, we are alleviating the hardship of people. We have responded. We have responded to the needs of the people. What have you done? Mr. Speaker, they didn't give a green slip, a white slip, or a penny to people. Mr. Speaker, when you stand in a self-serving environment, be careful what you say about others who are at least serving the people of this country. Be careful. Mr. Speaker, we are serving the people of this country. And we are also looking at how people accepted the $25,000. I don't have the list, but Minister Dharmlal probably does. But you spoke a lot. The honorable members spoke a lot about the former president, but he took his $25,000 and appreciated it. Take that page out of his book. Mr. Speaker, we have, in the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security, been working with the religious communities through a support and heal network, working with vulnerable communities, launched a program called the Young Influencers, working with 25 young people who will be there to inspire their peers and deal with important social issues like cyberbullying, bullying, peer pressure, and 2 of them have already presented to the United Nations. That is thinking about people at all levels of society and from every conceivable sphere across this country. Mr. Speaker, the Sophia Drop-In Center. Oh my goodness, the kitchen is in a horrendous condition. No child should be eating from that kitchen. Well, the Sophia Drop-In Center will get a brand new kitchen and also an overhaul. Mr. Speaker, we are catering for the indigent and homeless by refurbishing the night shelter and ensuring that there are programs that they can benefit from. Mr. Speaker, children will also benefit from a whopping $892 million that will go towards human resources, capital investment towards transportation to enable us to respond with alacrity to the numerous reports of child abuse, an awareness campaign, parenting programs, and also some of the other areas that I mentioned. We are focusing on adoption, and we are also encouraging people to adopt older children. But it's not only that. This ministry is quite expansive, so our cake legislation will be looked at. I'm pleased to say that in this assembly, we've already tabled the adoption bill to come into conformity with the Hague Convention. Next in line, trafficking in person. Then will follow pensions, public assistance, and before you know it, we will have legislation that is modern and in conformity with best international practice. Mr. Speaker, that's development, that's progress, and that's only a little bit of what this budget encompasses. Mr. Speaker, finally, I want to say that the people in this country would be listening to what we say and what we do. And this is not the time, honorable members on that side of your house, to pick your spot on Comedy Central, reality TV, or the lunch buffet show. This is a time for serious work. It is not your usual practice of eat, protest, abscond from this House. Mr. Speaker, people see you. People see the members on the other side of the House. Mr. Speaker, and finally, people's perspective out there would be considered the greatest indicator of the merits of a budget, how successful it is. I just want to mention a few of those. Kaichor News, Pause for a Cause, applauded the unprecedented nature of the government's focus on animal welfare and its pledge of direct budgetary support at a public policy level to eradicate cruelty to animals. And I remember the Attorney General, taxation from man to beast. Look at the contrast. Mr. Speaker, Newsroom, Public Service Commission, to this end, the budget is indeed a people-focused budget, which is healthy to facilitate broad-based and inclusive growth of the economy in terms of job creation, encouraging private investment, and more entrepreneurial activities. Guyana Chronicle, regular people out there. Govina de Onarain, as a young person from Region 2, listening to the budget was quite refreshing for me, especially to hear of the many plans for the agro-processing sector through the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm also pleased with the construction of the Abramswil Secondary School. George Chesney, love his comment, 85-year-old retired man living in Linden. The budget is wonderful, great, the best I've ever heard. The assistance for senior citizens was one of the most important parts for me. Manly Thomas, Aishalton, Region 9. As an Amerindian, I'm very grateful that the government,
Member, you may have to give
wrap
the
it up,
rest to somebody else.
has given us a lump sum of money to resuscitate certain projects. Mr. Speaker, I close with this. The voices of people, Mr. Speaker, the voices of people, what do they say about you? What do you want them to say about you? Mr. Speaker, I commend this budget to the House. I support it unhesitatingly, and I advise the members on that side of the House, join us, support the budget, and bring this country to a state of prosperity that we can all be proud of. One Guyana, Mr. Speaker, one Guyana.